Ukraine's president pleading for help as a battle is underway for control of his capital city of 3 million people. At this hour, the NATO response force is being activated for the first time ever as a defensive measure to Russia's invasion. NATO has activated the multinational force consisting of land, air, sea, and special operations forces from allies that can deploy quickly and bolster NATO allies. But the activation does not mean that U.S. or NATO troops will go into Ukraine. Ukraine, as you know, is not a member of NATO. But joining me now, live, is NATO Deputy Secretary General Mircea Geoană. Secretary, thank you for joining us. Things are looking extremely tense at the moment, fast deteriorating, but NATO now sending troops to countries that are in the Eastern Alliance. I would imagine that is Poland, Romania. Can you give us an idea of where those troops are right now?
Liz, thank you for having me. We've done two things, and we had a summit of NATO, of our leaders, just ended a few moments ago. We also had Sweden and Finland joining us as non-NATO countries, but very close to us. And we had the leaders of the European Union attending our summit. So what we have done in the last few weeks, we strengthened NATO's presence on the whole of the eastern flank, from the Baltic countries to Poland, to Central Europe, to Romania, to Bulgaria, all the way to Turkey. And our leaders, as you reported already, for the first time in the history of NATO, activated the NATO response force.
Yes.
But also for the first time in the history of NATO, we have activated the defense plans for this part of the alliance. So for now we have additional American troops, additional British troops, additional Navy. We have now more than 100 fighter jets in high alert on all geographies of NATO, more than 120 ships at sea from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, all the way to the Northern Sea and Baltic Sea. So what Mr. Putin has managed to do by this totally illogical war against an independent country, and they are also close culturally, is to basically, number one, to really to forge a national consciousness in the Ukrainians that are fighting so courageously for their land. You've seen the exchange the other day on the Snake Island between the Russian occupiers and the local Ukrainian troops. They died up to the last one defending their land. So
that's right.
That's one conclusion. Please.
Let me jump in, because I do want to ask, you've just articulated how many troops are surrounding and hitting key areas. NATO troops, and as we know, we've got nearly 5,000 U.S. troops, boots on the ground in Poland, waiting for the refugees to help in a humanitarian way. But what would trigger Article 5? What kind of attack where finally NATO looks at this and says an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us? And would that include, because for 15 years, NATO has said a cyber attack does represent the equivalent of a military attack. Would that be included?
Article 5 activation is if you want, the supreme clause of mutual defense, collective defense in NATO. And of course, we have definitions of what a military attack on us represents. On two new domains, military domains for NATO, cyber and space, because these are the two new additions to the traditional ones of land, of air, and of sea, we have rules in NATO that a severe cyber attack or a severe attack from space could trigger Article 5. There's not a clear thing, and the general before on the show was right. Cyber is a little bit more blur. It's not as blatant as seeing Russian tanks and helicopters and fighter jets invading Ukraine. But if there is a severe attack that could be considered by our leaders, by NATO, as consequential enough to trigger Article 5, there is an option in NATO to activate Article 5 for a massive, dangerous cyber attack, or from a massive attack from space. So these are new domains for NATO. And I think as we speak, we are seeing Russia using cyber massively against Ukraine. They are using against us. They are using disinformation. They are using hybrid. They are meddling with our elections. So you see Russia developing an arsenal of instruments, military and non-military, but NATO is basically embracing this broader definition of our security, including cyber, including space.
Let me jump in and ask about the SWIFT financial system. There's quite a bit of discussion that that's the way to really neutralize and neuter Vladimir Putin if you were to kick Russia off that system. The European Union has mixed opinions on this. Germany doesn't want to do it, but this would be definitely a painful blow to Putin. Is that something that you feel is the best possible way to hit him hard right away? Because when you hear President Biden say, wait, we got to give it time for these sanctions to work, the Ukrainians don't have time. Their power plants are getting bombed as we speak. So is there a better way around this that NATO's looking at?
I talked to our European Union friends and colleagues, and as I mentioned, we had the leadership of the European Union in our NATO summit today. And I have to say that I'm coming also from a country that is both a NATO member, EU member. And yesterday evening at the European Council, the European Union leaders adopted this severe package of sanctions in 5 minutes. It's unprecedented. European Union is known for sometimes taking lengthy decisions and lots of negotiations. They took this very massive package. For the first time, Putin himself is on the list of sanctions. That's massively important and also symbolically important. Of course, there are more options on the table, and they've been discussed yesterday in the EU. We had a discussion in NATO, even if NATO is not in the business of imposing sanctions. We are a collective defensive organization. I would say that all these additional measures are not off the table, including things on energy. But the ones adopted by the US, by Canada, by the UK, by Norway, by Japan, by Australia, and by the European Union are the most comprehensive and massive sanctions we ever seen until now. Is there room to do more? It depends on Mr. Putin. And this is something that I believe we have to keep as options. Of course, making sure that we take into account all the consequences, because there will be consequences, economic and financial. We are not operating in a vacuum.
Well, we know that the Austrian chancellor has said he would like to see Putin get a swift kick off SWIFT, but the rest of the European Union has to agree, so we shall see. The collective defense, when it comes to NATO, I would be very interested to know, as you start to look at what's going on, that the Kremlin has said, we would have discussions with Kiev, but we want to do it on Belarus territory. Belarus is not a neutral country. Would you agree with that, Secretary?
You know, the initial, what they call the Minsk Accord, which were basically a diplomatic format after the occupation of Crimea and of Donbass in 2014, was at that time a relatively acceptable place to do diplomacy. That's why the name of this accord is the Minsk Accord, because the capital of Belarus was the place when they took place initially. But many of us believe that the Minsk Accord, with the involvement of Germany and France, of Russia and Ukraine, are basically in a coma, if not dead. So what is now going on, and I know that there are attempts even now to find some form of diplomatic solution for this tragedy in Ukraine, it's not clear to us if the Russians would accept anything short as a total surrender of Ukraine, of a total surrender of the Ukrainian army, and basically the total demise of the democratically elected regime in Kiev. These are not acceptable terms. These are terms of surrender.
Indeed.
And we'll see what the situation on the ground would lead into. But for the time being, it seems that that the so-called offer from Russia is basically an invitation for capitulation. And these proud Ukrainians, to their merit, they are there to fight and defend their country, also with support from NATO countries, not from NATO as an organization. And if you see the tanks, Russian tanks destroyed, these are with Western anti-tank missiles. If you see the missile air system still functioning in parts of Ukraine, it's because this was sent by allies. As we
Indeed.
send financial assistance, humanitarian assistance, we continue to provide not NATO but individual allies like Canada, like US, like UK, like Baltic countries.
Mircea, we have to go.
To try to help these brave people defend their land.
They are brave people, and we are watching very closely as the markets are continuing to fight forward here. Mircea Geoană, NATO's Deputy Secretary General, live from Brussels.